Good evening. At 1:20 a.m. on Saturday, June 28, 1969, 4 plainclothes policemen in dark suits, 2 patrol officers in uniform, and Detective Charles Smythe and Deputy Inspector Seymour Pine arrived at the Stonewall Inn's double doors and announced, "Police, we're taking the place." Thus began the raid on the Stonewall Inn in New York City, a raid that would make history. It would result in 2 days of riots that would mark the beginning of the gay rights movement. The raid did not go as planned. This time the patrons were not cooperative. In the past, patrons would be lined up and have their identification checked. If they were dressed as women, they'd be taken to a restroom to have their gender verified by a female officer. If they were found to be a man dressed as a woman, they would be arrested. This evening, the police were refused. The men dressed as women refused to be identified. The men decided to not show their identification, so the police decided they would take everyone present to the station. Maria Ritter, who still presented as male to her family, recalled, "My biggest fear was I would get arrested. My second biggest fear was that my picture would be in the newspaper or on a television report in my mother's dress." A key component of the raid, the police wagons that would carry the victims of the raid to jail, had not arrived when the police had gotten everyone outside. Quickly, a crowd of 100 to 150 people formed, and the patrons began performing for the gathered crowd, posing and saluting the police in an exaggerated fashion. By the time the first wagon had arrived, the crowd had grown significantly. As the first patrons were being loaded, someone shouted, "Gay power," and the crowd began to sing, "We shall overcome." By this point, various items were being thrown at the police wagon, and officers, as the crowd suspects, things were being thrown at the police wagon and officers as the crowd suspected remaining patrons in the bar were being beaten by the police. Shortly, a scuffle would break out between the police and a woman being removed from the bar. She stated the handcuffs were too tight. She escaped police control multiple times and fought with the police for about 10 minutes, swearing and shouting. The woman, still unknown to this day, sparked the gathered crowd to fight when she looked at them and shouted, "Why don't you guys do something?" As an officer picked her up, threw her in the wagon, the crowd became a mob and violence broke out. Michael Fader would later explain, "We all had a collective feeling like we'd had enough of this kind of shit. It wasn't anything tangible anybody said to anyone else. It was just kind of like everything over the years had come to a head. And on that one particular night, that one particular place, it was not an organized demonstration. Everyone in the crowd felt we were never going to go back. It was like the last straw. It was time to reclaim something that had always been taken from us. All kinds of people, all different reasons, but mostly it was total outrage, anger, sorrow, everything combined, and everything just kind of ran its course. It was the police who were doing most of the destruction. We were really trying to get back in and break free, but we felt we had freedom at last, or freedom to at least show that we demanded freedom. We weren't going to be walking meekly in the night, letting them shove us around. It's like standing your ground for the first time in a really strong way, and that's what caught the police by surprise. There was something in the air, freedom a long time overdue, and we were going to fight for it. It took different forms, but the bottom line was we weren't going to go away, and we didn't." By the end of the first night, 13 people would be arrested. Some from the crowd would be hospitalized. 4 police officers would be injured. The following night, riots again would break out on and around Christopher Street. The street battling the second night would go on until 4 a.m. Police raids would continue for many years to come across the country. I myself have been present for 2 such raids in Fayetteville, Arkansas in the late 1990s and the early part of the 2000s. The mid-1990s was quite different even compared to today. The local queer establishment, Ron's Place, had moved in the early 1990s to an old warehouse in an industrial section of the city from its original location just off Dixon Street, where it had been forced out for the creation of the Walton Arts Center. In front of the building was a hair salon where Ron, aka Ginger St. John, the proprietor of Ron's Place, cut hair by day along with his best friend Danny Davis, aka Dolores Davis of blessed memory. Together, they headlined the Sunday night drag shows. To get into the bar, you had to go down the side of the building through an unmarked door into a small anteroom where your ID would be checked, and you'd be buzzed through a locked door. Once inside, you could be free to be yourself. Now, my first time here in 1996, I was but a mere 19 years old. The most wonderful thing was that Bill, Ron's longtime business partner, had a soft spot for us young ones. He knew we didn't have anywhere else to go, and he'd tell us to go put our IDs in the car, and we could come in. I adored Ron's place. It's where we'd meet many people. I'm still friends today, almost 25 years. I'm still friends with many of them today, almost 25 years later. I would see my first drag show at Ron's place. It would inspire me to create the illusion of Sasha Harrison in April that year. Unfortunately, in late fall of 1996, I was at Ron's place on a Thursday night when the police showed up. Having been coming as a regular for a few months, I was no longer carded. They knew I was underage, but didn't cause trouble. Upon hearing that the police were outside, I ran to the bar and told Brian, the bartender, I was underage and could not be arrested. I was terrified of my family finding out. I was not out yet to them. Brian, the sweet soul he is to this day, hid me in the beer cooler. Once the police had checked the IDs of the few patrons remaining and left, Brian told me it was okay to come out. Unfortunately, with such a close call, I would not be allowed back until I was legal. Fast forward a few years to 2001, I was at the Sunday night show. Multiple former Miss Gay Arkansas were in town from Little Rock and in the show. I was so excited. My absolute favorite queen at the time, Kelly Cruz, a Little Rock drag icon, was on the stage when the police busted through the locked door, ordered the show stopped, and the lights turned on. Everyone had to produce an ID, and we were lined up just like Stonewall, while the police inspected our IDs and looked for underage patrons. By this point in time, I'd found my voice. I wasn't quite the lovable, hateful queen I can be today. On this night, I showed my white privilege as I stood up to the officers. When asked, I produced my ID. However, I promptly asked why I was being detained. It was clear I was over the age of 21 in a licensed establishment where I had every right to be. I stated such and informed the officers if I'd done nothing wrong, I wished to go home. After a brief staring contest, the officer grunted and told me I could leave. Once outside, I was shaking with exhilaration and the realization that could have gone very badly for me. To this day, I have a tendency to be cocky, unamused, and bored in interactions with the police. As I think back on the number of times I've been snarky and unapologetically so with the police, I realize how privileged I am. At the end of the day, most of us tuning in tonight for services are privileged because of the color of our skin. Though we risk arrest if we were to exhibit such attitudes, it's not likely we risk being killed. The same cannot be said for people of color. As our country mourns the loss of George Floyd, I want you all to know the name of a black transgendered man who was killed on May 28, 2020 in Tallahassee, Florida by police. His name is Tony McDade. Tony was suspected of being involved in a stabbing incident earlier that day. He'd evaded police but was found shortly by officers. According to police, McDade reportedly had a handgun and made a move consistent with using firearm against an officer, prompting the officer to shoot McDade. An eyewitness told the local media that the police never tried to de-escalate the situation. I walk down this way. As soon as I get around this curve, I just hear shots, Clifford Butler told WFSU. I see McDade right there behind the tree. But I see for him, the officer, just jump out the car, swing the door open, and just start shooting. Butler says he never heard the officer who fired shots give any warning beforehand. I never heard, get down, freeze, I'm an officer. Nothing. I just heard gunshots, Butler said. Gina Duncan, Director of Transgender Equality for Equality Florida, a statewide LGBTQ advocacy agency, says, Tony was a queer black American who was gunned down by law enforcement. Nothing can erase that. Talking about Tony's earlier brushes with the law should not diminish the humanity of this being a person who is now dead, and certainly shouldn't diminish the fact that society failed Tony. Tony was calling out for help, and society failed Tony in so many ways. How many more people of color do we have to lose before we as a nation wake up to the police brutality surrounding us and terrorizing our black and brown neighbors? We've already lost Tony McDade, George Floyd, Philando Castile, Ahmaud Arbery, Natasha McKenna, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, Samuel DeBase, Christian Taylor, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Kamani Gray, Trayvon Martin, Kendrick McDade, Kenneth Chamberlain, Oscar Grant, Sean Bell, and too many others to name. May their memories be for blessing. On this Pride Shabbat, I'm proud to say that though things have improved for the gay community, they're not perfect. But I cannot say the same for my sisters and brothers in the black community. Every step forward they seem to take, they're forced back by systemic racism that is endemic in our society. I'm lucky. I'm now married to my wonderful husband, Josiah, married right here in this very sanctuary by Rabbi Block. We both have good professional jobs. We live in a racially diverse neighborhood south of I-630. I felt I'm doing my part just by not being part of the white flight to the west and the north. Again, showing my privilege. I know I need to do better. I need to truly practice the Jewish value of tikkun olam by reaching out to my black and brown brothers and sisters in my community and asking what I can do. I need them to know not only am I here, but I will defend them tooth and nail. I need to put my privilege to good use, helping to stop the violence my black and brown brothers and sisters face. We need to stop the list of names from growing, not because it's the Jewish thing to do, but because it's the right thing to do. Shabbat Shalom.